All right, friends, we're going to do an introduction into the early histories and basic tenets of Christianity. So let's make sure that we are aware that the earliest beginnings of Christianity start during really the height of the Roman Empire. So this is the size of the Roman Empire. And during the time period of the beginnings of Christianity, the general Roman belief system, while it allowed people to have religious diversity, it was very essential that regardless of their religion, that they pay homage to the Caesar, who was considered a living god, and some of the other Roman gods, or at the very least pay taxes and do service that might lead to building of temples and other things that would honor other gods. So it really depends on which emperor was ruling, but the Roman Empire was not usually very kind to the Jewish population because many of the things that Rome was asking of them contradicted their Jewish belief, right? And this will also affect Christianity because Jesus of Nazareth is the turning point that leads to Christianity. So the life of Jesus of Nazareth is important to understand some of the basics of it. Jesus of Nazareth, right, was born the year 1 according to the Gregorian calendar, and he was born to a poor Jewish family in Bethlehem, right, which is in modern day Israel, Palestine. And his birth was considered a miracle by most Christian traditions. And that's important to recognize that there's a lot of miraculous actions that happen surrounding the life of Jesus of Nazareth. The story of his birth is that his mother, Mary, had what's called an immaculate conception. Not all sects of Christianity fully believe this or place emphasis on this, but enough do that it's important for us to be aware that Jesus' mother had a miracle conception, that an angel called the angel Gabriel came to her to tell her that she was so pure of spirit that she would give birth to God incarnate on earth. Because that is the Christian belief of who Jesus is, that Jesus is the Messiah or the Savior, the physical form of God that was brought to earth in order to save people from original sin. So a little bit on original sin so that we're all on the same page. So the concept of original sin is very important in all of the Abrahamic faiths, and especially in understanding the significance of the life of Jesus of Nazareth. So the idea of original sin goes back to the first book of the Bible and of the Torah, the book of Genesis, which explains the creation of the world according to this belief system. And original sin. So this goes back to the story of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. And so it's believed that when God, and in this case a monotheistic God who individually created everything, that when God created the earth, right, he created everything, and he created it perfectly with much harmony, whereas we can see here, all different animals are living side by side, and that there is general peace. And he created 2 humans, right? He created Adam first, and from the rib of Adam, he created Eve. And this is an important detail because we can already see some of the gender dynamics in Judeo-Christian and Muslim history, the idea that women come from men, but men come directly from God. There's variety in this belief depending on the group, but that generally accepted understanding does have a lot of social effects on these cultures that embrace this. But the Garden of Eden was a very peaceful place, and they could enjoy all the wonderfulness of Eden, so long as they did not break one specific rule. So the one rule that God set out when he gave Adam and Eve, or he placed them in Eden, was that they can't eat from the tree of knowledge, which is what this is right here. As long as they didn't eat from that particular tree, all would be fine. One day, the devil shows up. And the devil shows up in the form of a serpent, right? So we can see here the snake in the tree. And the devil tempts Eve to tempt Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge. And again, it's important to note that sequence right there. That Eve herself is not tempted to directly eat it, but she becomes the temptress to get Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge. We'll unpack that more as we continue on throughout the year. But the effect of this is that they broke the rule. And after that, they were banished from Eden. And everything changed after that, right? Because they ate from the tree of knowledge, all of a sudden there was pain in the world, and there was war, and there was discomfort, and there was cold, and all those other types of things. So this is the first sin. And the general belief is that because of this sin, humans are born innately sinful, because according to this belief system, we all come from Adam and Eve. And the only way to fully restore the salvation of the world is for God to come as a savior to wipe away that original sin. So that's who Jesus is to Christians. Christians believe that God gave the Messiah, came in the form of a Messiah as Jesus of Nazareth. So we have the religious side of Jesus, and we also have the human side, because Jesus absolutely lived, right? There's overwhelming evidence that he existed as a human being. And then what we'll see is that many of his original teachings were inherently revolutionary, right? Considering the political context, because they often opposed some of the Roman rules. And also they went against the popular culture of the time. And by that, I mean, the Romans had celebrated wealth and achievement and power and war. But if you study the sermons of Jesus, specifically the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about the poor are God's children, and that the meek shall inherit the earth. So he runs very contrary to the Romans. There were many people who had religions that threatened the Romans, or had followings that threatened the Romans, but Jesus seemed to be growing a very powerful voice, and was growing a powerful, or at least notable, group of followers known as the apostles. And they begin to bring more people into the fold. The Romans were very persecuting towards the Christians. And this starts with the execution of Jesus, which, according to the Christian religion, it's the death and then the miracle resurrection of Jesus that helps to open the gates of heaven and thus wipe away that concept of original sin. And so his role as Messiah is achieved in his death, and what is believed to be, after 3 days of being buried after his death, that he rose from the dead and eventually ascended into heaven. So that miracle as well contributes to the salvation of the world. So Jesus was persecuted, right, as he was executed by the Romans. And then many of his followers were also persecuted. And they become what are known as martyrs, right? People who died for their faith. And because of that, it helps to popularize Christianity, seeing how many people were willing to die for this faith. Just one thing to take a quick look at, because one of the things we will trace throughout the year is the idea of acculturation, and the idea that people adapt and take on parts of culture that work for them. And when Christianity spreads, the way Jesus is illustrated will also change. So in Western culture, we're very used to seeing Jesus like this, right? A little bit more Western looking, with fair skin and fair hair. National Geographic did a projection based on DNA from people who are from Nazareth and Bethlehem and those areas where Jesus was originally from. And this is the guesstimate of what Jesus would have actually looked like, which shows how far that this particular image is from most likely how Jesus looked. And we will look at various ways that people portrayed Jesus, because ultimately people change the way Jesus looks because it depends on who those people are. We see this in every religion. Everybody wants their god or gods to look like them because they want to see themselves in divinity. So it makes sense that Jesus and other gods and deities and spiritual actors will be portrayed based on the culture that's portraying them. a bit more on Roman laws and quote-unquote Roman toleration. So as I said, under Roman rules, there were other religions that were tolerated besides Roman paganism, as long as it didn't interfere with the basic rules and regulations and taxes of the Roman Empire. But there had been a history of Jewish resistance that led to the suppression of the Jews and then later Christians, because for the earliest years, Christians were not seen as a totally separate group. They were seen as a new school of Judaism. And so because of that, they were subject to many of the similar persecutions that the Jews endured, especially under certain emperors such as Emperor Nero. He really had it out for these groups because they did not worship him. And so it was very common to place Jews and Christians in the Colosseum so that people could watch as they were attacked by lions and just, killed in other gruesome ways. Martyrs were killed by being crucified and hung or burned at the stake and other types of things. So it was a very dangerous thing to be an open Christian, especially. So for the earliest years, for the first really 300 years of Christianity had to be practiced in secret. And because it was so dangerous, many Christians fled Rome, which helped them to maintain their faith and also helps to spread the religion. And we'll see that Christians spread throughout the Middle East and around the Mediterranean for the most part. But they even go so far as to go to parts of India. And so I want to highlight a group called the St. Thomas Indians, or sometimes it's known as like a Syriac Orthodox Christianity. And so what we can see here are images of this ancient order of Christians. St. Thomas was one of the apostles of Jesus, and the belief is that he migrated as far as southern India, a section known as Kerala, India, in the year 52 CE, and founded multiple communities as he was in hiding. And so these are images that show that the St. Thomas Christians are still alive and thriving today, and that they share similar imagery and belief systems as Christians that practice all over the place, but they're a particularly older order. So this is an image of the cross of the St. Thomas Indians. I'm going to point out this one over here. One indication that a sect of Christianity is extremely old is that its sides are equilateral. The cross sides are equilateral. We'll look at other images that we might be more used to, which is that the vertical line of the cross is much longer than the horizontal line. That reflects an older or newer order of Christianity, I should say. So this is an Orthodox cross showing how ancient this order is. And here we see Orthodox priests of this order of Christianity. Sometimes St. Thomas is called St. Thomas of India, not because he was born and raised in India, but because of his time there and how he helped to spread the religion as far as Kerala. And eventually came back, which we will talk about some imagery that coincides with Indian traditional faiths and Christianity, which might help us understand how these images were transmitted and become common in both. So let's talk about the spread of Christianity a little bit more. So as I said, the first couple hundred years of Christianity, things had to be very secretive because it was very dangerous. And so who to convert was often a big question. And so for the first 100 or so years of Christianity, the general standard was that only Jewish people were eligible to be Christian, right? And this reflected the idea that Jesus himself was Jewish, and thus this is a Jewish tradition. But St. Paul of Tarsus, is credited with changing that tradition, and he begins to reach out to non-Jewish people. And this is when Christianity truly becomes what's called a universal faith. And by this I mean that anyone can join the religion, and anyone can achieve paradise in this religion. And for Christianity, that means ascending to heaven. And so it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if you were Jewish or not Jewish. If you convert to Christianity, accept God as the only God, adhere to the teachings of Jesus, that you too can be saved. Paul of Tarsus travels along the Roman roads to spread Christianity. And so, as I said before, in the early centuries, there was very little conversion, mostly because everything had to be done so secretively. However, there is some conversion because there was a common language. Since the Romans popularized Latin as a language, it meant that different ethnic groups had a way to communicate and thus learn the stories of Jesus and Christianity, and they could, convert if they wanted to. Also, as I said, this religion, especially because Jesus preached that the poor are children of God, that the meek shall inherit the earth, the messaging was very attractive to the poor and very attractive to women because it preached equality. And so we do start to see conversion. However, there's an event that leads to mass conversion, which is the conversion of Emperor Constantine. So Emperor Constantine in the year 313, not only by that point had he converted to Christianity, but he legalized Christianity through the Edict of Milan. And so it becomes, I have official in quotations, because it's not the true official religion, but what the emperor does becomes kind of the official thing, right? And so when Constantine converts, not only does it make it okay to be openly Christian, but many people will follow suit because people tend to copy what the powerful people do. So not only are we seeing more people convert, but Constantine has a huge effect on what Christianity looks like. Essentially, Constantine makes one unified church out of a culture that was not unified. Christianity before 313 was very decentralized by the nature of the fact that everybody had to practice it quietly. They weren't openly communicating from like one part of the Mediterranean to the other because they couldn't. So because of that, there were many early interpretations of Christianity, and Constantine didn't like that. So he begins to ban gospels that ran contrary to the one that he liked. So there are many that he banned, but I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. So one or two, I should say, Nestorian Christianity and Arian Christianity were very early Christian religions that sometimes questioned the divinity of Jesus. And I don't understand all the ins and outs of that. But what I do know is that within their texts, within their gospels, they believed that Jesus could have been a prophet and the final prophet of God, and that his death could be a miracle and be good enough to wipe away original sin. But they generally questioned the divinity of Jesus. Constantine gets rid of that because he does want a central God for everyone to worship, and he doesn't want diversity of thought. He also goes after what are called the Gnostics. So Gnostic means knowledge, and the Gnostic Gospels are really interesting. So essentially, there are many books of the Gnostic Gospels, but one thread between all of them is that knowledge and faith comes from within, not from without, meaning that Christianity is very individual, and that Gnostics are anti-authoritarian by their nature. And as one might imagine, an emperor is not going to like the idea of people not following authority. There were also some concepts in the Gnostics that challenged the Gospels that Constantine preferred, such as whether or not Mary had an immaculate conception and virgin birth. And also the life of Jesus. There are some stories about the life of Jesus. One of the Gnostics refers to Jesus using feminine pronouns. So now we have a whole question of whether Jesus was a man. So since there was a lot of different interpretations within the Gnostics, and ultimately because the Gnostics were very anti-authoritarian, he bans them as well. So the effect of Constantine is that all these different Gospels, some of which were written during the time of Jesus, were banned. right? Have to go completely underground, and sometimes they're completely wiped out. And so rather than have a decentralized and diverse Christian culture, we have one Christian church and one leader who is making some pretty big calls on that. So while Constantine is not necessarily going to be the full leader of the church tradition, instead that goes to, at this point in time, a position called the Pope, he does have a huge influence over Christianity and its culture and how we understand and practice Christianity today in much of the world. So a quick breakdown of some of the major tenets. So the Holy Scriptures include the Old Testament, which includes parts of the Torah. Christians do engage with text that is the same as Jews. The Ten Commandments as well. And a group of teachings that are part of the Sermon on the Mount called the Beatitudes, which is kind of Jesus' words about who is blessed, right, and basic rules to live by. In Christianity, and we'll see that in history, sometimes there's dispute over this, but a commonly held belief is that God has multiple forms: God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And that the way that these all exist at once, but are all part of the same God, is unto itself a mystery and a miracle. But there are some theologians who dispute this and have issue with this and question whether or not this is edging towards like polytheism, or at least not full monotheism. I mentioned earlier that many Christians, especially Catholics, believed in the miracle of Immaculate Conception. The holiest holiday is Easter, not Christmas. Christmas celebrates the birth of Jesus, and Easter celebrates the resurrection of Jesus, which is the miracle that wipes away original sin, which we've already chatted about. The Christian sense of what happens after you die is based on judgment, whether you have sinned or not sinned, and also whether or not you have accepted Christianity. Christianity is an exclusive faith. So Christians generally believe that you have to be Christian to go to heaven. Not all faiths believe this. So that's why there is such an effort to convert people to this faith, because they believe that's the only way that you'll be saved. So if you adhere to all the expectations, you go to heaven. If you sin a lot, you go to hell. Some sects, including Catholics, believe in something called purgatory, which is a place you go in the interim. If you have some sins, but you haven't committed the worst of sins, then you go into essentially like this waiting period before you can ascend into heaven. And there are multiple sects of Christianity, and we'll kind of look at how they all emerge over time. The Eastern Orthodox sect, the Roman Catholic, and Protestantism, of which there are multiple subsects of that throughout the world. So, as with all of our religions, we have to keep a special eye on Christianity and look at, when we study Christianity, and specifically people acting in the name of Christianity, are they truly acting by the words of Jesus and in the kind of spirit of Christianity? Or are they acting in the way that Christianity is often politicized by certain people, such as Constantine? So we just have to keep a keen eye out for that, because any religion can be utilized by politicians for their own personal purposes. All right, we'll end there. Thank you for your attention.